Picture this: Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, dawn, November 8, 1519. You're a young noblewoman from Tlaxcala, age 15, selected as tribute for the emperor's pleasure houses. The morning mist rises from Lake Texcoco as you're led across the causeway toward the largest city in the Americas, 200,000 souls, more than Paris or London. You smell copal incense mixing with the copper scent of blood from yesterday's sacrifices. Your bare feet feel the smooth stones still cool from the night. Ahead looms the palace complex of Moctezuma II, a city within a city, containing over 3,000 rooms. Somewhere inside waits the man-god who claims descent from Quetzalcoatl himself. You're brought to a courtyard where hundreds of women live, some wives, some concubines, some simply collected. An older woman, once beautiful, whispers, "The emperor has over 1,000 women. You'll be sorted by birth, beauty, and purpose. Some bear children, some serve in temples, some," she pauses, "serve other needs." Through an obsidian-framed window you glimpse him, Moctezuma II, the 9th Tulatoni, speaker for the gods. He's reviewing tributes, not just gold and jade, but people. Young men for sacrifice, young women for his houses, children for the priests. In 6 months, strange pale men with hair like corn silk will arrive, and this world will end. But today, the empire that demands 20,000 human sacrifices a year is at its terrifying peak. Welcome to the Hollow Throne. I'm your host, and today we explore the sexual empire of Moctezuma II, where political power, religious duty, and carnal control merged into a system that shocked even the conquistadors who destroyed it. Content warning and thesis. This episode contains discussions of systematic sexual control, human sacrifice with sexual elements, forced marriages, and the intersection of religion and sexuality in Aztec culture. We'll examine historical accounts of tribute systems involving virgins, ritual defloration, and the clash between Aztec and European sexual norms. Viewer discretion is advised. Moctezuma II ruled the Aztec Empire from 1502 to 1520, 18 years that marked both the apex and apocalypse of Mesoamerican civilization. This isn't simply a story of royal excess. This is about how the Aztecs created a unique system where sexuality, divinity, and statecraft merged into something that horrified the Spanish even as they committed their own atrocities. Our sources are problematic but revealing. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who witnessed Moctezuma's court firsthand, the Florentine Codex compiled by Sahagún from indigenous accounts, Cortes's letters to Charles V, and surviving Aztec codices. They paint a picture of a sexual political system unlike anything in European experience, where virgin tribute was taxation, where priests performed public sex acts for fertility, where the emperor's semen was considered divine essence. What makes Moctezuma's story essential is understanding how radically different concepts of sexuality, divinity, and power created a system the Spanish used to justify genocide, even as they secretly envied the sexual freedoms they destroyed. The Prince of Blood. Picture this: Tenochtitlan, 1480. A 14-year-old prince named Moctezuma enters the Karmakak, the elite school for nobility and future priests. Unlike his warrior brothers, he's drawn to religious study, prophecy, and ritual. He learns that Aztec nobles aren't just political leaders, they're cosmic actors, maintaining universal balance through sex, blood, and sacrifice. His education includes sacred sexuality. The Aztecs believed sexual energy was teotl, divine force. Properly channeled, it maintained cosmic order. Suppressed or misused, it brought catastrophe. Young nobles learned elaborate sexual rituals, the religious calendar's intercourse requirements, and how royal semen literally fed the gods. But Moctezuma was born under troubling omens. The year 1 rabbit, associated with instability. Priests whispered about ancient prophecies. Quetzalcoatl would return in 1 reed year to reclaim his throne. That year would be 1519. Young Moctezuma absorbed these prophecies along with his sexual education, creating a unique psychology of divine destiny mixed with apocalyptic dread. Dr. Camilla Townsend, a historian of Aztec culture, notes, Moctezuma was raised to see himself as a semi-divine sexual conduit between Earth and cosmos. His sexuality wasn't personal, it was theological statecraft. The Flower Wars and Virgin Tribute. By 1502, when Moctezuma became emperor at age 35, he inherited a system built on sexual tribute. The Flower Wars, ritual conflicts with neighboring states, weren't just for capturing sacrificial victims. They established tribute relationships that included annual virgin quotas. The Codex Mendoza records the tribute. Tlaxcala sent 100 virgins annually. Oaxaca sent 80. Even allied cities provided daughters for the emperor's houses. These weren't random selections. Specific requirements for age 13 to 18, beauty and virginity, were enforced by imperial inspectors. But here's what European sources misunderstood. Many families competed to have daughters selected. Being an imperial concubine meant status, wealth, and possible divine motherhood if you bore the emperor's child. The sexual tribute system was oppressive, but also paradoxically aspirational for some. The divine phallus doctrine. Upon becoming Huitlaitawani in 1502, Moctezuma didn't just gain political power, he became a living god whose sexuality maintained cosmic balance. The coronation included ritual intercourse with priestesses representing goddesses, literally inseminating the divine feminine to ensure universal fertility. Bernardino de Sahagún records, the emperor's seed was believed to carry Teot, divine essence. His frequent intercourse with many women wasn't lust but duty, spreading divine essence throughout the empire. This theological framework justified what Spanish observers saw as monstrous excess. Moctezuma expanded the imperial seraglios beyond any predecessor. Bernal Dias counted over 1,000 women in the main palace alone, with satellite houses throughout the empire. But these weren't mere harems, they were theological institutions with strict hierarchies, rituals, and purposes. The classification system. Moctezuma created an elaborate classification for his women, Chihuapili royal wives, usually 20-40 political marriages to seal alliances. These women had their own palaces, servants, and could own property. Their children were potential heirs. Ahui anime, pleasure women, professional courtesans trained in music, poetry, and elaborate sexual techniques. The Spanish called them sacred prostitutes, but they were more like geishas with religious functions. Tlachihuzantin, concubines. The majority, hundreds of women from tribute, gifts, or selection. They lived in communal houses, available for the emperor's pleasure or to be gifted to nobles. Ikpotli, sacred virgins. Young girls kept virgin until specific religious ceremonies requiring defloration rituals. Their virginity was harvested at astronomically determined times. Cortes wrote to Charles V, Moctezuma has many women as mistresses, daughters of chieftains, and other chieftains give him their daughters as a sign of peace. All the lords under his dominion bring their daughters for him to choose. The virgin tribute economy. Picture this. A provincial town in Oaxaca, spring 1515. Imperial inspectors arrive for the annual virgin tribute. Every family with daughters aged 13 to 18 must present them. The inspectors, usually priestesses, conduct intimate examinations for virginity, beauty marks, and physical perfection. Those selected are marked with ritual tattoos and taken to Tenochtitlan. The Codex Mendoza shows detailed tribute lists. From Toctepec, 20 virgin maidens of good appearance. From Toconocco, 16 maidens who have not known man. From Cuitlaxtlan, 24 daughters of nobles, pure of body. These weren't random collections. Specific towns were required to provide specific numbers annually. But here's what makes this system unique. Virginity was a renewable resource in Aztec theology. Through ritual purification, women could be re-virginated for specific ceremonies. The Spanish friar Diego Duran writes with horror, they had herbs and rituals they claimed restored maidenhood, allowing the same woman to be deflowered multiple times for different gods. The economic impact was staggering. Towns that couldn't meet virgin quotas paid penalties in gold, cacao, or sacrificial victims. Some communities practiced selective breeding, raising beautiful daughters specifically for tribute. The virgin tribute system became a parallel economy intertwined with imperial taxation. Upon arrival in Tenochtitlan, the girls entered a 40-day purification and education period. They learned Nahuatl if they didn't speak it, court etiquette, sexual techniques, and their religious duties. Most importantly, they learned their new identity. They were no longer individuals but vessels of divine sexuality. The sacred prostitution complex. Moctezuma institutionalized sacred prostitution beyond previous emperors. The Ahuyanime weren't common prostitutes but theological functionaries. They served at temples during festivals, had sex with warriors before battle to transfer divine energy, and entertained at palace feasts where intercourse was public and ritual. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who attended these feasts, writes, after eating, women entered who were beautifully dressed and painted. They danced, then coupled with guests in view of all. The emperor watched from his throne, occasionally joining. What shocked us most was the religious solemnity. Priests blessed the couplings, incense was burned, prayers were said during the acts. The Ahuyanime had a complex relationship with Moctezuma. They weren't his property but served the state religion. However, the emperor had first rights to any Ahuyanime, and many bore his children. These children occupied a special caste, not royal but sacred, often becoming priests or sacrificial victims depending on omens at birth. The Spanish were particularly horrified by the youth blessing ritual. Boys of noble birth upon reaching puberty were brought to Ahuyanime for ritual defloration. Moctezuma often presided over these ceremonies, sometimes participating with the boys' mothers or sisters to bind the family to divinity. The sacrifice-sex nexus. Nothing exemplifies Moctezuma's sexual religious complex more than the Tenochtitlan festival. Each year, the most beautiful war captive was selected to impersonate the god Tezcatlipoca. For 1 year, he lived as a god given 4 wives representing goddesses, unlimited pleasure, worship from citizens. Moctezuma himself would bow to this prisoner. But here's the dark twist. In his final month, the god impersonator would have public intercourse with his goddess wives at specific temples. Moctezuma would watch and sometimes join, literally participating in divine copulation. On the final day, the impersonator climbed the temple pyramid, breaking clay flutes representing earthly pleasures on each step before having his heart torn out. The 4 wives faced different fates. If pregnant with the god impersonator's child, they were honored but isolated until birth. The children were considered semi-divine, raised for future sacrifice. If not pregnant, the women entered Moctezuma's houses, having been blessed by divine seed. Sahagun records an even more disturbing practice, the virginity harvest before major sacrifices. Moctezuma would deflower virgins at specific temples, their blood-stained cloths burned as offerings. The girls were then sacrificed, their hearts removed while Moctezuma's semen was still inside them, supposedly carrying messages to the gods. The children of the empire. By 1519, Moctezuma had fathered between 150 and 300 children. Sources vary wildly, but these weren't just royal bastards. Each child had a specific role in the imperial religious structure based on their mother's status, birth omens and physical characteristics. The Spanish were appalled by the child sorting system. Beautiful daughters were raised to become ahuyoneme or wives for allies. Strong sons became warriors, but children born under inauspicious signs or with birthmarks were raised for sacrifice, treated well until their appointed death. Pedro de Alvarado reported, the emperor's children by sacred prostitutes were marked at birth. Some had their ears pierced with obsidian, marking them for Tlaloc. Others were painted with jaguar spots for Tezcatlipoca. These children knew from infancy they would die for gods their father served. Most disturbing was the practice of father-daughter marriage. When daughters by lesser concubines reached puberty, Moctezuma would sometimes take them as wives, believing this concentrated divine essence. The Spanish saw this as monstrous incest. The Aztecs saw it as theological recycling of sacred bloodlines. The Spanish arrival and sexual culture clash. November 8, 1519, when Cortés entered Tenochtitlan, Moctezuma offered him the highest honor imaginable, his own daughter Tenochtitlan and several other noble women. Cortés, publicly citing Christian marriage laws, declined, then privately took them as mistresses. This hypocrisy would define the conquest's sexual dimension. The Spanish were simultaneously appalled and aroused by Aztec sexuality. They condemned the harems while eagerly taking indigenous women. They destroyed temples with phallic imagery while raping their way across the empire. They burned codices depicting sexual rituals while forcing native women into concubinage. Bernal Diaz admits, "We condemned their sodomy and sacrifice while we ourselves took their women without Christian marriage. Every conquistador had native women, some by force, some by hunger. We were no more moral than the heathens we condemned." During his captivity, November 1519, June 1520, Moctezuma continued his sexual rituals even as a prisoner. Cortés allowed him his women, partly to keep him compliant, partly fascinated by the system. Spanish soldiers would secretly watch the emperor's activities, simultaneously disgusted and envious. The death of the god emperor. June 29, 1520. Moctezuma dies under disputed circumstances. Spanish sources claim his own people stoned him. Indigenous sources suggest Spanish murder. Either way, the sexual theological system he embodied died with him. His successor Cuitlahuac lasted 80 days before dying of smallpox. The careful balance of sex, power, and divinity collapsed. With Moctezuma dead, the palace women faced chaos. Some were claimed by Spanish soldiers, others fled to their families. The sacred prostitutes were particularly targeted by Spanish priests for forced conversion or execution as diabolic whores. The virgin tribute system ended overnight, leaving thousands of girls in limbo. The rape of Tenochtitlan, August 13, 1521. When Tenochtitlan finally fell after a 93-day siege, the Spanish and their indigenous allies engaged in systematic rape that dwarfed anything in Moctezuma's system. Cortés himself admitted losing control of his men for 3 days. The Tlaxcalan allies, who had provided virgin tribute for generations, took particular revenge on Aztec women. An anonymous Nahuatl account records, "They took the pretty women, the light-skinned ones. They lined up our daughters and chose like picking fruit at market. Our women who had been kept for gods were used by soldiers in the mud of our dying city. The erasure and transformation. The Spanish systematically destroyed evidence of Aztec sexuality. Codices depicting sexual rituals were burned. Temples with phallic or vulvar imagery were demolished. The Apui anime were forced to become either Christian wives or were branded as prostitutes and enslaved. But the system transformed rather than disappeared. Spanish colonizers took indigenous wives and mistresses in numbers that would have impressed Moctezuma. The encomienda system created sexual slavery wearing Christian dress. Priests who condemned Aztec sexuality regularly fathered children with native women. The Black Legend and brown bodies. The Spanish used Moctezuma's sexual practices to justify conquest. The Black Legend portrayed Aztecs as sexual deviants requiring Christian salvation. Yet Spanish colonizers created a caste system based on rape, mestizos, mulattoes, dozens of racial categories documenting systematic sexual exploitation. Modern DNA studies reveal the conquest's sexual reality. 90% of Mexican mestizos have indigenous maternal lineage but European paternal lineage. This represents one of history's largest systematic rape events, far exceeding anything in Moctezuma's tribute system. Re-examining the historical narrative. Dr. Camilla Townsend argues, we must understand Moctezuma's sexual system within Aztec cosmology, not European Christian morality. Was virgin tribute exploitative? Yes. Was it the demonic perversion Spanish sources claimed? No, it was a complex theological political system that made sense within its worldview. The focus on Aztec sexuality also obscures Spanish atrocities. While condemning Moctezuma's 1,000 concubines, Cortés enslaved and distributed indigenous women among his men. While destroying temples for their sexuality, Spanish priests raped indigenous children in missions. The sexual violence of colonialism far exceeded anything in the Aztec Empire. Modern lessons. Moctezuma's system reveals uncomfortable truths about power and sexuality. Sexual control has always been inseparable from political power. Religious justification can make any exploitation seem divine. Tribute systems involving women persist in modern trafficking. Conquerors often exceed the barbarism they claim to eliminate. The virgin tribute system Moctezuma operated openly continues today in hidden forms: sex trafficking, forced marriages, sexual slavery. The theological justifications have changed, but the fundamental exploitation remains. The numbers that condemn all sides. Let's be clear about the numbers. Moctezuma, over 1,000 women in his houses, hundreds of virgin tributes annually. Spanish conquest, 90% of indigenous women raped, millions enslaved. Death toll, 90% of indigenous population dead within a century from disease, murder, and exploitation. The Spanish system that replaced it was genocidal, hypocritical, and continues to shape racial and sexual dynamics in Latin America today. Call to action. If this examination of historical sexuality and power disturbs you, good. When we simplify the past into heroes and villains, we miss how systems of exploitation transform rather than disappear. Subscribe to the Hollow Throne for more unflinching examinations of history's complex darkness. Hit the notification bell. Share this video. These stories matter because they reveal patterns that persist. Next week, Genghis Khan, the father of millions through mass rape. Final reflection. Moctezuma II believed his sexuality maintained cosmic order. The Spanish believed destroying his system was God's work. Both built empires on the control and exploitation of women's bodies. Both justified atrocity through divine mandate. The throne is always hollow. Whether filled by Aztec god emperors or Spanish conquistadors, power expresses itself through sexual control. Moctezuma died 504 years ago. The systems of sexual exploitation he and his conquerors embodied didn't. Think about that.